The Sekhukhune Security Crisis and Demand Forum has asked Limpopo Premier Dr. Phophi Ramathuba to absorb guards working at government buildings. It also demands that the government intervene to stop looming retrenchments following the termination of some contracts. For more on this, I'm now joined by Ndavhe Ramakuela, who's the spokesperson for the Limpopo provincial government. Thank you so much, spokesperson, for joining us this evening. And now, the forum has written to the Premier with regards to the status of the work of the security guards. What is the Limpopo government's position on this request, and have there been discussions about the feasibility of placing security guards on the state roll?
Good evening, Katlego, and your viewers. Yes, we have received a memorandum that comes from the organization that we have just referred to. At the moment, government hasn't had discussions on the issues of insourcing of the security guards. We have companies that are employed as part of service provider across all government departments, and we treat them as part of service providers that we have, like the ones that we have for building of roads, building of schools, and the like. So what we have at the moment, that the security companies are private security companies that render services to government, and they employ their own private individuals. So the discussion on the insourcing of guards hasn't taken place yet, but we are not closing an option of us having that type of discussion as we look into what is possible within available budget, but also within the legislation.
Now, in reference to private security guards, in the letter that has been penned down by the Demand Forum, they say that the Premier is aware of private security companies that currently employ the officers on government premises, but they do, however, say, these companies often fail to comply with labor regulations, denying workers fair benefits and treatment. What's your response to that?
Yes, we are aware of that, and that's why the South African government has made provision for areas where there is a crisis, particularly in terms of the employer-employee relationship. There is the Private Security Industry Regulation Act, which was passed in 2001. It was specifically meant to deal with such issues, which would include, amongst others, salaries, remuneration, leave days, and others. So what we are looking at as government at the moment is that such relationships, when we employ a company or when we appoint a company, we will then make sure that they subscribe to those regulations, that they are registered. That's why there shouldn't be any company that we've appointed that is not PCRA registered. And that registration is meant to cover areas wherein, if there are complaints, there are tribunals that Act has allowed to happen outside what we have done as a person that we've appointed. So whilst we sympathize with the challenges that workers are facing, you would understand that the intervention that we can make is quite limited in terms of what the law requires of us to do.
Now, GIWUSA, which is the General Industry Workers Union Association, has also pulled their weight behind this discussion, and they're calling for the Limpopo government to consider this request, adding that they are significantly strained, and these are the security guards, and are highly underpaid. How do you think them becoming a part of your payroll would help mitigate those challenges that these security guards face?
The government is not averse to the issue of looking into a possibility of insourcing security guards if we were to reach that particular level. We have to consider a number of avenues. The current staff complement within a provincial government is regulated, and also there's a particular ceiling that we have to work towards. We don't have to exceed the number of employees that are within the government payroll. So some of those are considerations that we have made. But secondly, Katlego, you have to think about it as a government is also called upon to provide a conducive environment for the economy to grow. Part of it is that we employ service providers who provide services of different kinds: security, construction, health services, and others that come into government to provide such services. They grow the industry, and in so doing, they also create jobs. But the issue of them not paying their employees' salaries that are equivalent to what is required. It's something that the employees would have to deal with through their unions, and there are bargaining councils that allow them to go into those places to raise such issues. So we have the desire that if it were possible, if we look into the budget, if we look into the regulations that we have, if they allow us to do so, we'll do so. There are areas where we have previously done that. In health services, we've been able to insource the kitchen staff, for example. At the moment, we are working within the public works, wherein we have people who are working in the Wednesdays who are helping with maintenance of gravel roads and the like. And so such service is now being done internally. But all of these have to follow due considerations of either the budget or as well what our ceiling is in terms of the staff complement. But what I need to emphasize is that government is open to talk about it, particularly the provincial government. But you would know that it's not only the provincial government that has employed private security guards within them. So the debate shouldn't even be limited to the province. It should go into a national sphere wherein we have to open it up for the rest of government to look into.
And how much of a balancing act is needed with regards to the call for insourcing of security guards on the one hand, and on the other hand, the call to cut the government wage bill? How do you find your way around that as a provincial government in ensuring that you find a midpoint between these two arguments?
It is a tightrope to walk on at the moment. And that's why we would want to a situation wherein we could be relieved of the burden of having to have a huge, bloated staff complement while services are being provided. When you look at it, if you're to look at in 2001, possibly there were fewer security companies, and at the moment there are many. And what that has done is that they've grown the possibility of the economy in the rural areas and other places where they are, that people who possibly would have been employed as a single person now employs over 200, 300 people. So we should look into it in both ways, in all ways, that whilst we're dealing with issues of employment, let's also look into the issues of economic development, and socio-economic development within our province, that creating such conducive environment allows us more avenues to create jobs rather than keeping one person in a government employ.
Giwusa has also come out with regards to the interventions that government could have, especially with regards to the security companies that provide the security guards. Now, you mentioned the labor laws that are in place that should protect their rights, but how much of an intervention does the Limpopo provincial government give, especially when it comes to regulating and overseeing and ensuring that these employee conditions are within the correct regulations?
The regulation is not only for the Limpopo provincial government. I have made reference to the PCRA Act, which on its own gives a broad framework within which the conditions of employment should be carried through in that particular industry. So our role as government, that's why when we put in the supply chain a request for service providers to come through, one of the conditions that we put is that they should be able to have a certificate and provide evidence that they are indeed compliant to that. So individuals themselves who are employed by these companies have a recourse to go into to deal with that, and particularly the unions that are representing them. It can be brought into government that we must then go and represent those workers, whereas there are unions that their job is actually to do that, to go and represent those workers and deal with it. As government, yes, we are indeed sensitive to the issues of exploitation of workers. We have said this all the time, that we don't want any of the companies that we work with, be it a private security company, a construction company, or any other company that has been employed or has been appointed to work with government. They shouldn't be given room to exploit workers in any way, and that we condemn with the strongest possible ways that we could use.
Are there any planned future engagements in the near future with the Demand Forum?
We have said that we are open to discussions, so it doesn't even have to be a demand. It could be a request for a session to talk about this. Maybe after failed negotiations, it could rise into a demand. So you realize that the approach to it is a bit flawed, whilst we understand that they might have frustrations. a request could be made that we look into that particular option. And I think the Executive Council is open to such kind of advice and suggestion without necessarily being able to make the demand.
All right, Ndavhe Ramakuela, thank you so much for your time and for giving us
It's our
your
pleasure.
perspective this evening. That's Ndavhe Ramakuela, who's the spokesperson for the Limpopo provincial government.